Stephen Boutwell. I was born in 1981 here in Livingston, Alabama, and from age 7 all the way up into my 20s was raised county south from here in Choctaw County, and then I've recently moved back off and on in the past few years. So born here, but raised in Choctaw County, and then came back as an older person. Most of my growing up was I think my coming of age years, or my more formative years, was in Choctaw County, um, which is interesting. I mean, it was just a very small town. I remember that everyone that was growing up there had promised themselves, they're like, I'm going to get out of this town. I'm going to get out of this hole as soon as I get old enough to do it. That was everyone's big dream. That's what we said to each other every day. And um, I think growing up there is what kind of pushed me out. I just wanted to see the rest of the world. Growing up, I grew up there as a black sheep, and so that's coming from a black sheep perspective. You don't want to be a black sheep in Sumter or Choctaw County growing up as a teenager, or you're going to have trouble and you're going to want to get out. So I think it was really a mutual agreement. More welcoming there. Compared if you're going to be homeless. And what I mean by homeless is living in a tent out in the woods, or you can try to think of it as sleeping on the sidewalk. I never did the sleeping on the sidewalk thing. I was in a tent by rivers and stuff, and
Yeah.
I always worked. I did day labor and stuff like that. So I wasn't what you call a bum, it's what you call a hobo. And the difference between that is a hobo travels and works, and a bum is your guy begging for vodka money on a sidewalk
Yeah.
and sleeping in his own trash. And so as a hobo there, it was a lot more welcoming for that culture as opposed to the South, where you would, if you're traveling around with a backpack and living in a tent, people are going to be like, "Who's that guy? And what's he up to?" And they think he got an agenda. And so being out west was just. Well, you have to understand, I ended up homeless. I went there with a backpack and like I think I had $29 on me just for the first couple of days. And but being from Alabama, I like to work. I didn't like to be lazy or anything. And so there, I started getting jobs working in San Francisco, and I lived there for about 6 months, just learning some really hard ways. Before I got there, I'd never seen a skyscraper before. And so I started off really, really like what you call a greenhorn, or really raw there, rookie there in San Francisco, trying to learn the ways of the streets and all that. And it took me a few months, and finally a kid came up and he told me he was going to Alaska to work on a boat, on a fishing boat. And he's like, "Hey man, you like boats?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I love boats. I grew up in Alabama. We'd go out on bass boats and the Tom Bigby and jug for catfish. I love boats." And he's like, "Yeah, you want to go out in the ocean?" And I was like, "Yeah." Well, unsure, with kind of a question mark in my head. And then he told me how much money it was. It's like $10,000 in 2 months. I was like, "Yes, definitely, I will go on this boat." And I went up there and started working in the canneries in Alaska. And after the canneries, went onto the boat and started working there. And then I learned how to travel homelessly. And what I mean by that is houselessly, really, would be
Yes.
the word. Because when I was on the boat, I was living on the boat. They serve you food on the boat, and you're living on the boat. No, it's not a house, it's not a home, but you're living like that. And when I work on a lot of the farms, I work on a lot of farms in California, Oregon, and Washington, doing everything from strawberries to pears to apples. They usually have like a little cabin that I can stay in. And so, that job may only last 6 to 8 to 10 weeks, or whatever the harvesting season is or the fishing season is. But for most of that time, I am in a home. Now, is it what you want to? Is it a? Your type of home? No, I'm rocking and rolling on the waves and sleeping in a cot on a boat, or sleeping in a cabin that may or may not have running electricity or water, but it has 4 walls and a roof. And so I try to use the word houseless. So my biggest takeaway from being on the west coast of California would be, if you're going to be someone that's sort of in a alternative subculture, or what people may say like a rebel or a hippie or a traveler or whatever. There's so many ways to sum that up. I like the word vagabond.
Yeah, I never.
There's different labels.
Yeah.
So a home bum is someone you see on the sidewalk begging for change so he
Yes.
can get that kind of stigma. And then you've got a hobo, which is a working person that doesn't stay in a town forever. They stay there long enough to work
stop.
till the apples are done picking or what the hell ever's going on. And they're not ones begging for money. They're usually working and making that money, although it's not that much. But they are still houseless or homeless. Now, I mean, you got and there's names for this that go on and on. A rubber trap is someone who lives in their vehicle, hence the word rubber. They're living on the rubber wheels. That's a rubber trap. You got boat punks who live on boats. You have tramps that travel just on foot. You have bike punks that or bike traps that live on motorcycles out of their satchels and the backpacks you see going on there. You got van dwellers who live in vans. You got schoolies that live in converted school buses. So there's a name for every person you see that's not living in a house but living in some alternative subculture there. They definitely have a name for that subculture. And they will get offended if you, like as a hobo, I get offended when someone just calls me a home bum and gets me confused as someone who begs for money instead of works. That's offensive to me. And so you want to be careful when you want to go off into terminology with someone that's homeless and use the right one.
Yeah, just for respect.
What happened is I bought a school bus and converted it into a living arrangement. Had a kitchen, bunk beds, and everything. And what I'd want to do, well, I toyed around with the idea for a while, was I wanted to take other homeless travelers that were like me, kind of like working kids that were just black sheep but lost in society, but they weren't bums. They just were lost, and they came from, you know, good places or good families, and they were just black sheep that fell through the cracks of wherever the hell they came from, but loved to travel, and they had morals. They were well cultured, they were educated, and they were just, like I said, the best way to put it is black sheep. And I wanted to take these kids and put them to some sort of productive use. I knew that they liked helping out and working and stuff, and that they weren't bums, but I also knew that they didn't want to work for like the traditional corporation. They didn't want to do fast food or work in a gas station. They weren't ready for college. Some of them were just kind of thinking about it. I had people on the bus that had gone to college for 2 years, and they were kind of on a break and sort of this little existentialism of, what do I really want to do in my life? And so I knew that there was that group of participants. So I said, you know what, let's create an entire volunteer project, a nonprofit, where we can take these kids traveling, but they also get to get back in society. So we're not just traveling to the town and just using you up, like going to your restaurants and saying that's giving back to society, or going to your festivals and getting high, or whatever hippie kids want to do. That's not really giving back to society. Going to a concert or going to a restaurant, which I thought what would really be beneficial is going and helping out at, say, the Senior Citizen Center, or helping out with the veterans, or helping out with homeless assistance, or the animal shelters, or the community gardens, things like this that are built by the community, but they need help and they don't have enough volunteers. They don't have enough money to run these things. And so I said, how about let's load up a bunch of kids, anywhere between 50 and 20 of them, go hit a town for 2 weeks, do every single nonprofit job we can do in that town. And it was great, because it ended up accidentally, the first part was funding for it. How would I fund this? You know, feeding 15 kids 3 meals a day is not cheap, and you're not going to do it on spaghetti every night. Okay, you've got to have your proteins and your carbs. You're volunteering these kids. These kids are doing 20 to 30 hours of volunteer work a week. And it's often tough stuff, working on the farms. You're working with shovels, working at the dog shelters. You're not petting puppies. You're cleaning shit out of kennels. So it's tough, hard work, and you've got to feed these kids. You got to put the energy back into them. And so funding for that was really hard. But I learned when we helped out at, say, soup kitchens, or homeless outreach places, or food banks, after our group would volunteer there, in one day our group would do 1 month's worth of work for them, because we came in like an army, 15, 20 people, and just came in and said, every building's getting mopped, every mirror is getting cleaned, every food is going to be organized, I sent my team off into 3-person groups of like 15 to 20 people, and we, with the help of their coordinators, of course, just came en masse. And so they would end up giving us, for 1 day of volunteering, they would donate to us 1 week of food. We had 6 dogs on our bus. I let dogs and cats. We even had a pet squirrel on there at one time.
Animal lover.
Yeah. And so I allowed my members to bring their pets on. Some of them were even service animals for our members. And we would work at a dog shelter, and they would give us a month's worth of dog food right then. And so I started learning that as our project gave back to the community, when they saw our needs, we didn't have to ask them, hey, donate to this GoFundMe or donate to, could you have $100 bill? They saw our needs and saw how much effort. It was like, I don't want to use the word karma, but I guess that's the best, and I'll use that word loosely here, but it was sort of the karma of the entire thing. Is they saw us as like, oh my gosh, do you guys need food? Do you need dog food? Do you need gas money? And we held up the trip completely sustainably just based on donations that we never even asked for. And it was supposed, the entire project was supposed to last for 1 year, and it was so successful I stretched it out to 3 years. There's a lot of kids out there that fall between those cracks, and they're good kids. They just need a little direction and time to figure out where they're going to go, you know.